We want to get to the chariot here. Let's jump ahead a couple of verses and get on to Elijah going. And so as they continued walking and talking, this is in verse 11, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them. And Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha kept watching and crying out, Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. And so this is that scene, the chariots of fire, the image that you're used to of Elijah being taken up in this whirlwind or in a storm or in a chariot of fire. And I think we need to start with the imagery. The imagery first off. Why the storm or the chariot of fire, the horses of fire? Why this?
Well, the answer that comes to mind is one, God always, his voice, the word for voice in Hebrew is kol. It's the same word for thunder. And so God always traditionally speaks out of the clouds, out of the thunder. When you hear the thunder, it's God talking. I think I've told this joke before when my kids would always say, why is it raining? And I said, that's because God's crying. And they say, well, why is God's crying? And I'd say, it's probably because something you did. Right now, I stole this from Saturday Night Live a long time ago, but they don't like this joke. But the idea is that God's voice is thunder. Okay, so fine. God's always going to speak out of a cloud or out of a whirlwind, out of this chaotic storm that can destroy anything. So that's God's presence. But the chariot and the horses, we actually have this in the Psalms that Yahweh, that God rides on a chariot, that he rides along, I think we talked about this in an earlier episode.
Yeah, in that ball episode, we talked about some of this storm rider or chariot rider of how is a movable, or what's God's transportation look like? Is God hoofing it everywhere? God's taking a chariot.
Right. And it's not that he's actually in the chariot or he's riding on the horses, but he's probably back in the chariot. And you have this imagery of he's being pulled along. And so this is consistent with exactly what we find elsewhere in the Bible, that God is not yet this distant deity who's just kind of without a body and without a form. And he rides around in a chariot, and he's coming to swoop down and to take Elijah up into heaven. And you see the whirlwind, and you see the chariots, and you see the horses, and they're on fire. And it's the imagery that it's more anthropomorphic. It's not wholly anthropomorphic, but you see more of this that you find consistently in the Bible. And again, the big takeaway here is that Elijah doesn't die. He's such a holy man. He's just taken into heaven, which, then you have to ask the question, in a worldview where everybody dies, we don't know if there's a heaven that he ascends somewhere. He ascends to be with God. Is he dead? But he doesn't have to experience the traditional death and burial. He just goes up to be with God. Right.
Yeah. And it is our immortal story here, because we're told he ascended into heaven. We're not told that he dies.
Right.
So but where does he go? Why does he go? But I think a part of the question too for me is, why this prophet? We've got a lot of prophets.
Right.
We've got a lot of prophets that maybe, if you're thinking of later prophets that we are connecting with holiness, but Elijah is the one that gets connected with this tradition of immortality, of going up into heaven. And it is interesting. I mean, it connects with a lot of his encounters. He's been doing a lot of this maybe call and response activity with God, going back to the prophets of Baal activity and to having this provision, that there is this kind of different relationship maybe here that we're seeing fulfilled in being the one that gets taken up.
I agree. When he calls, God shows up for whatever reason. So a lot of these prophets, they will receive a message, and they are the vessel, they are the vehicle, Ko Amar Adonai, right? Thus says the Lord. And they are merely the vessel, and they must speak. You get this in the Balaam tradition, right? You hired me to curse these guys, but I must say what the deity puts into my mouth. With Elijah, when he says, okay, God, send the fire, boom, the fire comes, and it's time for me to go, God will come and take him. And again, he's taken into the heavens. We gets translated into heaven a lot, but it's still Shemayim, right? It's into the heavens. And so we're not sure where he went, but of course, later Jewish tradition would be he was taken up into heaven. Therefore, he never died. Therefore, he must still be around. And if he must still be around, that means he's eligible to come back. And therefore, this leads to many later traditions about Elijah.
When we get this connection coming up in the beginning of the New Testament, John the Baptist, the question of, is John the Baptist Elijah? Jesus, in questioning his disciples, who do they say that I am? Both of them get connected with, some people say, you're Elijah. Because as this person who hasn't died, and the prophet, but also in these conversations we get, there's the Elijah, there's a Messiah, and there's the prophets. So he does get a little bit of a distinction between some of these other prophets and these identification stories.
Right. If John the Baptist is the forerunner, the precursor to the Messiah, then maybe he's Elijah, because isn't that supposed to be Elijah's job? So maybe he's Elijah reborn. Maybe John is some other figure that's coming. Maybe Elijah's still coming, right? There's the whole Passover tradition. He's supposed to come back first. And is John fulfilling this role? Is John Elijah? And then, of course, when the Messiah, when Jesus comes, he said, who do people say that I am? Well, some people think you're Elijah. You're the one that's coming. So you have this tradition, but the thing that's important to remember is the tradition is that because Elijah didn't die, he's supposed to come back. He's eligible, let's say. He's eligible to come back because he hasn't died.